Well, welcome everybody to the April online program for the alumni of the Sunshine Coast Health Center up here in beautiful Powell River, British Columbia. And this month, we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that's the drug experience. What's it like to be high? Which I think is kind of a natural thing for addictions, but as weird as it sounds, very few people talk about this. I ask people why they use drugs. They always tell me, oh, it was depressed, or a lousy childhood, or I used when I was angry, or it got rid of the anxiety, or like everything. But what to me is the most obvious thing is that they use for this altered state of consciousness, which felt pretty good. In fact, the only people who really talk about this stuff are people with PhDs, as weird as that sounds to you, but it's quite true. One of the earliest guys to talk about it was, I don't know if you remember this book, The Varieties of Religious Experience by this guy, William James, that I think I mentioned this guy quite a few times at the center when you were clients here, if you recall. And the reason I mention it because William James had this really profound influence on Bill Wilson, the driving force behind the 12-step program. And one of the reasons that Bill Wilson liked James so much is because James actually said when you get drunk, this was a variety of religious experience. When you get drunk, the grass is a little greener, jokes are a bit funnier, total strangers are your friends. And that was one of William James's big point. He didn't think that getting drunk was really an escape from anything. What it was this search to feel alive, to feel vital, to feel connected with the world and connected with other people. Right? And so Bill Wilson, that really resonated with him. And it was, in fact, as you all know, this was Bill Wilson's brilliant insight into alcoholism, that it was not really an escape from anything. It was the search for something bigger. Right, that was that comment he made in 1943 at the Shrine Auditorium in LA when he said, the alcoholic is the fellow who's trying to get his religion out of a bottle, when what he really wants is unity with himself and unity with God. But anyway, there's something really remarkable about this drug experience, like this experience of being intoxicated, this experience of being high, some profound appeal that addicts will go for it, even though they know for a fact, what's coming after that experience. Oh, the misery, the depression, the irritability, more crap to deal with, all that. But this experience is so powerful for them that they're willing to face all of the consequences for that experience. So there's got to be something pretty incredible about this. And in the early days of psychology, oh, and by the way, William James was considered probably the first American psychologist, although this is really in the infancy of psychology. But he was fascinated with consciousness, including these altered states of consciousness. And fascinated about all these things about what does it mean to be conscious of life? What is this altered state of consciousness, including what is being drunk and what is this stuff from nitrous oxide? And so, believe it or not, in the early years of psychology, we actually studied this stuff. But then this thing called behaviorism popped around, right? Psychologists want to be very scientific, and so they needed stuff to measure. So you can measure behaviors, but it's pretty tough to measure altered states of consciousness. So at any rate, everybody sort of they thought that was very unscientific, all this altered state, so they forgot about it for decades. Until, weird as it may sound to you, things like computers popped up, and they wanted to build a robot, right, and try to get a robot to think, but they had, well, what does it mean to think? What does it mean to be conscious? And then all the psychologists, because of artificial intelligence and a bunch of other things, started thinking about, oh, geez, well, how do people think? And what does it mean to be conscious? And they had some basic stuff, like they knew there was the waking state of consciousness and the sleeping state of consciousness. They knew those two, but they really didn't understand either of them. And And then a bunch of people started saying, well, you know, there's hypnosis. Well, that's another state of consciousness. And then there's this part between the sleeping and the waking. That's another altered state of consciousness. And there's like meditation. And so that's another state of consciousness. And of course, drugs produced another one. So there's a lot of research done on drugs and this altered state of consciousness. And today, psychology books, we have the psychology of consciousness. And just about every course includes like LSD and marijuana. And what is it like? What does it mean to be high on marijuana? What does it mean to be high on LSD? So we're getting back to doing some more research, back to psychology's roots. Anyway, this month we'll look at what some of the experts have discovered about these intoxicated states. Like, what is the feeling? Like, why do people why do they crave this altered state of consciousness? And we'll begin with William James, and this time not on alcohol, but on this thing called nitrous oxide, which back in those days was apparently there were a lot of people getting high on nitrous oxide, which is laughing gas. You know, stuff they might give you at the dentist or something like that. And nitrous oxide, according to William James, was one of these substances that could produce what he called this variety of religious experience. And similarly with alcohol would give it, and he also used chloroform as another example. But one of the things he discovered from these things, give you one example. So he would talk about when he got intoxicated himself, because he had some personal experience. A typical thing he would do is he'd get out sheets of paper and start writing opposites. Like there's God and the devil, and there's good and evil, and there's happiness and sadness. And he said that when he was intoxicated, this stuff had profound meaning to him. Like he could actually make sense of these opposites and put them together at a very deep level. And he recognized fully that the sober onlooker would look at him and say, yeah, what are you doing? Right? That's all nonsense, and you can't make sense of that. Oh, you're just drunk, or you're just stoned on nitrous oxide, right? And they would dismiss him. But he was quite convinced that under these intoxicated states, this altered state of consciousness, he could see into reality something that he couldn't get when he was sober. In fact, when he said he was sober, when the intoxication was wearing off, that he would be left, as he said, staring blankly. Right? And so he's quite convinced that there was something going on in this state that he was in while intoxicated, something profound. In this case, he could reconcile these opposites. And he made mention of a whole bunch of other things. But as a start for what this meaning of what it's like to be intoxicated, as a start, I think it's important to recognize that people like William James, this giant intellectual thinker of the 20th century, that he believed that somehow he could see beneath the surface of things, that he could peer into the mysteries of life, like, for example, these opposites, and allow these opposites to come together, and he could make sense of them, something he could never do when he was clean and sober. And in fact, he believed in it so much he would even call this intoxication a variety of religious experience. So there was something about it that allowed him this great connection to something greater than he was. Okay. So as a start, to remind you of your time at Sunshine Coast Health Center, William James talked about the drug experience and what it meant to him. And next week, we'll come up with another fellow who did some research on crack cocaine. So, see you in a week.